tell us more about, you mentioned that assessment initiative. Could you tell us about how when you were a teacher, what was your approach to assessing your students? Because I know that can be kind of hard to define in the art classroom.
Okay. That's that 1997 we had our first state standards were developed and put in place, and about 5 years before then we started developing a curriculum K through 12 in my district. And we had 3 elementary art teachers. I was the only one at the middle school at that point, and 2 at the high school. And once we completed that curriculum, we had educational leaders, curriculum leaders, and school administrators that encouraged us to go to the next level of assessment work. And in many ways, we were kind of ahead of our time. It wasn't happening in other school districts. K to 12 anyway. And so we had some folks that worked with us, and we developed common assessments. We did one at 3rd grade, one at 6th grade, and one at 8th grade. And keep in mind that we had, 150 students in 7th and 8th grade. So I was actually working with that number through a whole school year. So I had 7th grade for half the year every day, and then I had 8th grade for half the year every day. So to develop an assessment, a common assessment that we used was a really interesting process because of the number of times that I saw kids, and that's not very common in Maine, especially at this point. Most teachers are seeing kids once or twice a week. Sometimes for the entire year, sometimes for only 9 weeks, sometimes for half a year. So we developed common assessments, and the plan was to administer to them on a very black and white, very strict process. And so 1 week out of the year, we gave that assessment at grade 3, at grade 6, and grade 8, like I said. The 8th grade assessment had 3 components to it. It was short answers, and it was a response to artwork, and that component of the assessment was actually developed by the language arts teachers and the arts teachers together, and it was administered in the art room when we were piloting it. We also piloted it in the language arts classroom, and it was really fascinating to see the difference in the quality of what students were writing in that writing component, because kids so often think of, I'm in language arts and I'm writing, and that's reading and writing is what I do in here, so I will do a really good job. And in the art classroom, the quality of the writing wasn't as good, but they were scored by language arts teachers, and they were scored by art teachers together for the content and then also the mechanics of the work. And we got very close to making that assessment the district-wide writing assessment, because it was an interdisciplinary assessment that was ultimately created. And then we had a drawing component to it as well. It was basically kids held their hand in a certain position, crumpled a piece of paper, and it was a 4-point or 5-point rubric, and it was scored for the use of shading, the use of line to create the hand, the background, and the creativity involved in creating the entire piece of artwork. And what I found as I learned more about assessment is that it wasn't just an indication of where kids were, but it was an indication of how I was doing as a teacher. So I took that drawing assessment and I turned it into, they did it the first day of class, and they did it the last week of class, and then they did it at the beginning of 7th grade and the end of 7th grade, the beginning of 8th grade and the end of 8th grade, and at the end of 8th grade, they could take those 4 drawings and lay them out in front of themselves, and they could see how their skills and their knowledge had been built, and where they had come from at the beginning of 7th grade and where they were at the end of 8th grade. And certainly that was also an indication to me of how I was doing as a teacher.